Consumers these days have choices, and more choices than ever before. What we need to understand is what consumers really want. So I'm just going to take you through a bit of a history lesson first of all, and then introduce you to some consumers we've spoken to. The New Zealand lamb industry has a history dating back to 1870, where the first frozen shipment went off to the UK. And really, it pays to sit down and think from time to time, what has changed since then? Lamb has been treated as a commodity over the years, unfortunately, and it's still treated as a commodity by some countries and some in our industry, unfortunately. And a lot of these companies engage third parties to represent the product in the market, and really where price is the primary point of difference. These people that represent our lamb using price as the main point of difference really aren't understanding who the consumer is and listening to what the consumer is seeking. Third-party traders and supermarkets, they actually don't want product with a point of difference, because that point of difference then actually reduces the opportunity for them to compete on price. So what we've got to think about is whether this old way of doing things with price being the primary point of difference, whether that is actually holding us back. The message from the market for many years has really been around leanness, that leanness was important, or so we thought it was important, and possibly it was important when we were selling legs into the UK. Things have moved on from there now, that we're questioning now, is fat evil? We actually think that possibly the focus on fat in the past has been primarily around yield and the commercial loss that goes on in processing lamb, and we've possibly disregarded the importance of fat as a very important attribute towards eating quality. Clearly, when we think back, our industry unfortunately has been behaving like traders rather than marketers, and we haven't been understanding truly what the consumer is after, and using that to grow the demand for our lamb. We need to start learning to listen to consumers and actually truly understanding what their desires are, because their desires aren't always what we think is right. It's really important to listen to what the consumer wants. Today, consumers have more choices than ever before. There's many ways now to complete a purchase. We're seeing now the influence of Amazon Fresh, My Food Bag, Blue Apron. There's ways now that consumers can actually buy product in a more direct sense rather than going to the retailer. That possibly provides opportunity for us to present our product in a different way. Whether we compare our product, lamb in the case today, to beef, chicken, pork, lamb in most market sectors is priced at the upper end of all proteins. We have a lot of experience through our Atkins Ranch involvement in the US, and typically we will see lamb French racks presented in the US market with a very similar price point to USDA Prime strip loin. So USDA Prime strip loin is marble scored, and through that marble scoring you get a pretty well assured guarantee of eating quality. Over the past, particularly the past decade, we've seen a lot of change around consumer purchasing behaviour. Consumers now are looking for convenience. They expect convenience. We're seeing major retail chains now in the US that have had traditional serve-over meat cases move to grab and go, where these people that are always in a hurry can run through, grab a portion of protein and take it home. Consumers now have moved away from the weekly shop. They now pretty much decide in the early afternoon what they're going to have for dinner that night, and they buy it on the way home. A lot of transactions for food now is done electronically across the web. Possibly very hard for us to understand here in New Zealand, but more and more we're seeing purchasing across the web of day-to-day food products. Fast meal preparation and meal preparation that is different. People no longer plan ahead, get a leg out of the freezer, thaw it out for 24 hours, and then cook it for 3 hours. They're thinking at 1 or 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, what am I eating tonight? They grab it on the way home. They then want to get into their kitchen and prepare it and be sit down eating it within 20 minutes, half an hour of getting home. So it's fast, it's convenient. We've recently, as Atkins Ranch, undertaken a consumer survey using a survey tool called D-Scout, where we listened to 1,100 consumers. And what I'd like to do is just share some of the feedback we've had from consumers on what they're looking for. One of the most interesting things is when we started cutting into the 1,100 people, we cut over half them out by asking the question, do you eat meat and do you eat lamb? At that point, we were well under half the group of people. Then when we started asking about how often you eat lamb, we got down under 25% of people would regularly eat lamb. So very, very small target audience. So I'll just share feedback from one of the ladies we interviewed across the web.
So the two main dishes that I love the most with lamb are lamb curry, like an Indian style curry, and lamb falafel. And it has to be done medium rare at the very, very most. I prefer the rarer the better because of the tenderness of the lamb. So you can't go too far past medium rare or you ruin it. And these two dishes are my favorite just because I love spice, and lamb goes so well with spiced food. And I love rice, and I love that whole culture of food.
Doesn't that video make us think a bit? Because I think when we get out around New Zealand and we start talking to people about how they like to cook lamb, the feedback I get is most people like it medium to well done, most people like a roast or a bigger joint. And very rarely do we hear around New Zealand people using lamb in ethnic type cooking. So that one lady there raised that she likes using lamb in ethnic cooking. She likes it with spice, and she likes it rare. So this is the survey we've done, listening to these people has really opened our minds up, and has been a very helpful tool to allow us to understand what excites the consumer. Educated consumers in the US now are actually starting to understand the difference between good fat and bad fat. What we've got to understand also when we're selling to a consumer is that each piece of meat is actually being judged. And when you have consumers that only eat a very, very small volume of lamb each year, having one bad eating experience could actually influence, in the worst case, whether they eat lamb again. In the best case, it might actually mean that they eat less lamb. So we really need to start thinking about the importance of consistency of the product we make, and making sure, given that lamb's pitched at the very highest price point, that the eating quality is fantastic every time. We can't afford to have the odd bad experience. Just one point I didn't cover there, sorry. One thing we probably haven't thought about as an industry also is the industry's done a reasonable amount of work on branding and storytelling. Branding and storytelling will actually open doors for us, but it'll be that eating experience that actually influences the return purchase, the repeat purchase. So really, really important.
Hi there.
So I'm at Publix. My Publix has a great selection of meats, including lamb. I picked up some of these lamb chops, and the things that I look for are marbling. I want a little bit of fat, but not too much fat. I usually buy bone-in, and I like buying the Greenwise version, which is antibiotic-free, hormone-free, usually trying to look for some of the healthier cuts of meat. So I'm excited to make these. I'm not quite sure how I'll prepare them yet.
So Publix is what I would describe as a mid-tier grocer in the US. So it's not a high tier like Whole Foods or Bristol Farms. So what we are seeing now, you heard that lady mention that she's looking for antibiotic-free. Antibiotic-free and some of those assurances or product points of difference that we've used in the past to market our lamb are now becoming mainstream. They're getting pushed down into the lower levels. Very interesting that she specifically talked about marbling. So the way the survey was done was, it was done, as I say, using a tool called D-Scout. These people were all volunteers. They weren't forced into doing this, and they were given jobs or tasks to go and do. And in this case, they were sent out to buy a cut of lamb and to tell us what attracted them to that cut of lamb. We also then had other tasks for them to do. They had to take the lamb home and cook it and actually tell us where they got the recipe from and what actually influenced them to choose a particular recipe.
For this shopping trip, I went to my local Ralph's grocery store where I purchased other goods, and I went straight to the butcher and asked what cuts he had that were fresh for the day. And I looked at the loins, the shanks, the ribs, and I definitely was looking for a bright red meat that had a lot of marbling in the fat, which meant to me if it cooked well or prepared well, it would be nice, tender, and juicy.
So probably personally my biggest concern about where we're at as an industry is I'm of the belief we're getting left behind. We need to watch that we're not spending too much time working out what we need to do, because we truly need to catch up. In 1999, the first paddock to plate eating assurance program was launched in Australia by the MLA. That was the beef MSA grading program. Then in 2008, they launched their lamb grading program. We think back a little bit, 1999, that's coming up 20 years ago. And if you talk to people in Australia, that MSA grading program on beef has absolutely changed the perception of Australian beef domestically and internationally. So we've got some decisions to make as an industry, and we need to move fast because I think there is an element of catch-up required. The supply path, we clearly all have a part to play, all the way from the grower through to the person selling the product in the market. Each step can really only screw up what the previous part in the puzzle did. So it's really important to understand that, and for each step to understand their responsibility. As a processor, we must take responsibility for reduced holding time pre-harvest. That's prompt slaughter. There's been a whole lot of work done on farm to get an animal to an optimal quality. Therefore, we don't want to remove any of that condition by holding too long in the yards. We need to make sure we're using the right type of carcass stimulation. Something the industry's learnt is that the ACNA programs, the accelerated conditioning and aging programs that were developed in the 80s, they were developed primarily for frozen product. Given now most of us focus on sending chilled product into the market, there needs to be a focus on enhanced stimulation, because if you overstimulate, you can end up with other quality issues. We need to actually understand the influence of packaging. Packaging has a big part to play, and clearly we do now get the benefit of natural aging during sea freight, which is actually something we should be using in market as a marketing tool. Other considerations though that we shouldn't forget about leading into harvest is trucking time off feed, access to water, and time in an unnatural environment. These all have a significant influence on eating quality.
Here I am at Trader Joe's, and here's the meat section, and this is the lamb I'm gonna get. Atkins Ranch, grass-fed, natural from New Zealand. It's chopped, so everything I want, and it looks fresh, and I love it.
I'm pleased to say there are still some people out there buying based on brand, and in this case, our friend here chose the right brand. So the market is made up of many people, and everybody has their own different point of view. It's really a case of, for us here as growers and as processors in New Zealand, seeking an understanding and then bundling up our product and presenting it in a way that appeals to the most affluent group of consumers that can afford to pay for the point of difference we offer.